You are a big Suzuki guy.
I am a big Suzuki guy.
Even still.
It's easy in hindsight, I guess, to look back now and be like, there was no risk.
Once again, it's speculation. Like, we know the facts, but it's just like what could have happened if we saw number 22 on, Makita Suzuki at that time. This is the bench races on the Ride Network. It's cool. We've been talking about doing something for a long time. We've been plotting, conceptualizing, thinking, wondering ways of doing it. We've been in the game for a little while now. So we're just here being bench races. That's what it's about. And if people dig it, they dig it. If they don't dig it. And it's cool. It's just a place to come chat moto and have a good time, basically.
Bench races, we're going to be tackling topics in particular. Most of them from the past, I think, a little bit of reminiscing, probably heavily revolving around our generation.
I mean, we acknowledge the greats and guys like Stanton, Emig, MC, Jeff Ward, Rick Johnson, Lachine, and those sorts of guys. But for me, I was born in 1995, so I'm a 90s kid, and you sort of take that span of like, I'd probably be 6 years old, 7 years old before I worked out exactly what I was doing on this giant floating rock in space. And honestly, about that time when I started to get a grip of the world is when I got into moto. And you think about, that time period is that 01, 02, 03. For me, it was Ricky and Chad. At that point in time, Ricky was dethroning the king, had dethroned the king at that time. Jeremy was on his way out after winning 7 AMA Supercross championships, and it was Ricky's time. Chad in 02 had won 6 of 7 on the East Coast, and we get to 03, and it's those two. It's those two, and it's game on. And from there, that's what we like to consider the golden years of the sport, and that's, as far as my expertise goes, is sort of from there onwards, and I think I would say the same for you. It was a good time for the sport, and that's what we'll get into on this episode is a couple of little interesting bits that we've heard on the grapevine that blew me away when I honestly heard it the first time. So I think it's cool for people to know and sort of, speculate, conceptualize different things, and it is speculation. It's talking about facts that happened to that period, but, it was a sick time, and it's a good thing to discuss, I reckon.
This particular topic, I guess you'd say, is one that maybe continues to be, to some extent, sort of shrouded in a little bit of mystery. What are we going to be talking about?
I think where we begin more specifically is a conversation that I had with Chad, I think a couple years ago, is that, Chad was at Yamaha, Ricky was at Honda, he went to Suzuki, and what Chad alluded to, people not knowing, is that he had the opportunity to ride that Suzuki, at around that same time period Ricky did, or even before Ricky did. So, that time period is characterized by the aluminum frame, the steel frame. Ricky was on the aluminum frame on Honda, Chad was on steel. They both had their strengths and weaknesses, but I think it was widely considered that the steel frame was superior. That's what Ricky went from Honda to Suzuki, was a steel frame, and Chad's 04 Yamaha that he won the title on was steel frame, and then Yamaha went to aluminum, which he absolutely hated. Like, he absolutely hated that bike. It wasn't good on flat surfaces, hard pack, it wouldn't turn, it'd swap side for side. Little things like Ricky went to Bridgestone, and you just, once again, it's speculation. Like, we know the facts, but it's just like what could have happened if we saw number 22 on, Makita Suzuki at that time.
I think somewhat in the case of Makita Suzuki, and first and foremost, I'm a Suzuki diehard, as you know, the audience doesn't know. At that point in time, before Ricky was entering into the Makita Suzuki squad, I wouldn't say that they were necessarily considered the powerhouse that between him and Roger DaCosta, they eventually became. And by eventually, I mean almost instantly. So when he went there was this sort of element of risk. And it's interesting to think about the fact that in Chad's instance, as we've sort of learned, that maybe could have been his opportunity.
You got to think of that high-powered team of Kevin Windham and Travis Pastrana, in that sort of 02, 03 period. It's like, sure, they didn't get the success, but they wanted to. But I mean, you signed two people who are like, if you're going to get success at that period, Ricky widely acknowledges that, a lot of people spoke about Pastrana as the guy to knock him off. But the fact is that Suzuki tried and it didn't work at that period. And so, what they did was just gather personnel at that time and far out. I mean, they went after a dude who literally just went 24-0 in the outdoor series. They went after Ricky Carmichael, and he was a bit of a question mark at the time, though, because he sat out the 04 Supercross season. Like, it wasn't a sure product of what you were getting from Ricky, even though that sounds wild to say. After what happened in 03, it was like, is Chad the man? Like, that rookie season where he won the 6 straight to finish off the season. He finished 7 points off the title in his rookie year. It's like, is this guy the guy? And you got to think about that time period of 2003. Like, we know what happened after, and we know that Ricky beat him more often than not. But on paper, when you think of 2003, it's like Chad could be the guy. He could be the guy. So Ricky goes to Suzuki. It's a bit of a gamble. The bike hadn't won for a hot minute when he hopped on it. But, as Chad put it to me, is that it was essentially a Yamaha engine, and it was a steel frame, and it was Bridgestone tires, and it was a product that was ready to win right from the get-go.
Chad was hot property. For him to sort of come from abroad, do a season with Yamaha of Troy, jump immediately into 250 Supercross at the time, and to be able to contend with clearly the rider in Ricky Carmichael, who had established himself as a cut above the rest of the field, with all due respect. It's easy in hindsight, I guess, to look back now and be like, there was no risk. There was absolutely no risk. But at the time, coming down to that amount of points at the end of the year against a rider that accomplished.
At that point, it's like, where did this kid come from? Like, where did he come from? 2002, he goes 6 for 7 indoors on the East Coast. But Ricky was battling Villeman, and Villeman had the points lead until Daytona when he injured his shoulder in 2002. So Ricky gets to 03. And it's like, here's this Frenchman, number 12, that I've got to deal with. And out of nowhere, here comes Chad Reed, number 22, wins A1, and has a pretty solid streak. That season sort of came down to just a couple rookie errors. A 6th at Minneapolis, and there was another 6th in there, which on paper doesn't seem too bad. But when you're going up against Ricky Carmichael in a championship, you cannot give him that. You can't give him that. So you look at those results, and it's like Ricky 367 points, Chad 360, and Fonseca's in third on 225. And it's just like,
with all due respect to Fonseca, who was an amazing rider with his own history of awesome results, but I mean, it wasn't even close.
It wasn't close. And so, that period of time when we're thinking about it is 03, 04, then you get to 05. And I think, it's widely regarded that we're really ripped off by the motocross gods that we didn't see the 04 square off between Ricky and Chad. And I mean, even that's got its interesting history though, because Ricky was going to race the 450. And I personally think that Chad would have had his number in 2004, which is contrary to any evidence because it never happened in any other season. And I thought that with Ricky on a 252 stroke, but then I heard Ricky saying that he was testing in secret, getting ready on the 450 up at Castillo Ranch. Not only that, he was a second a lap faster on that 450 than he was on a 252 stroke. So it's like, what happens in that season? What happens? K-Dub was dangerous on that 450, and I know Chad didn't take Wyndham as seriously as he did take Ricky, but K-Dub, gave Chad some fits that season. And I just think Ricky was Ricky. So if Ricky rocks up on a factory 450 Honda that he goes 24-0, in the outdoor season after the Supercross, it's dangerous. It's dangerous.
I guess the outcome of that championship and how it would have looked if Ricky was in there, I mean, it's almost too fun to speculate on. I mean, I think as an Australian, you'd like to get behind Chad. If you're going by the numbers, it'd be ridiculous not to go with Ricky, but it would have been an awesome battle. And I mean, kudos to K-Dub, he did a really good job of filling that place, making that championship interesting. Whether Chad had backed off a little bit or not, I guess we'll never really know. I'm sure he'd say that he would have. But I think ultimately, Ricky, he starts to look towards the future. Suzuki
basically line up 300 wheelbarrows full of $100 bills, whatever that comes to. I hope it's millions and millions and millions of dollars, because that's what they gave to him. And, there's an interesting story there with Honda, and like they dropped the bag with Ricky and James because they were trying to sign the both of them at the same time, and they ended up with none of them. Sort of a sidebar, but Ricky goes to Suzuki. That RM250 two-stroke in 2005 looked like a great bike. He was fast straight away. He raced those World Supercross rounds in Canada that year. He looked fast there. He rocked up to A1 and was just riding Anaheim in that mud just like it was a dry track, like hitting all the triples, and he ends up going down. But he was racy. He was racy from the get-go. I know that Chad didn't feel confident from the get-go on that motorcycle, and I know that Yamaha was really pushing him hard to run the number one plate. And, that's an interesting scenario to see yourself in, because in 2004, you go from feeling so confident in the motorcycle, you got the steel frame, you got everything you want, and you're gelling. And there's a difference in how he rides in 04 versus 05. I think
noticeable, I think.
Visually.
And I think in hindsight, you've been able to recognize when Chad is comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Chad didn't feel like a confident champion going into 2005. I know he's got his patented 2.2, but that's probably part of the reason why he didn't want to run the number one, because it's like, well, if I'm not feeling confident coming in, like, I don't want to be coming in poking the hornet's nest in a way. Like, you want to feel confident if you're coming in with that. And so, it's a weird scenario to find yourself in. But even in that season, though, he put up a massive fight. There were elements of the unbelievable talent that is Chad Reed. You guys got to look to Daytona, like he broke Ricky in his backyard. You got to look to San Diego, where he chased him down the whole main event, gets him pretty much on the last lap. Those sorts of rides were incredible. But then you get to Atlanta and it's like the bike simply wouldn't corner on a flat turn. Ricky passed him on the same flat turn twice, made him look silly, made the Yamaha guys look silly. And that's the thing, it's like if Chad finds himself on that Suzuki, which is essentially a very similar bike to the previous Yamaha that he rode, the battle that we missed in 2004, maybe we see it materialize. But if Chad ends up at Suzuki, it's like, then I don't know where Ricky ends up. Like, does he re-sign with Honda or does he go elsewhere? It's kind of hard to tell.
I'm mostly curious about, with Chad and his struggles on that frame, what do you think could have been possible if he'd have been that rider that had made the switch to Suzuki?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, isn't it? But, was the Yamaha such a bad bike?
That Yamaha still largely exists today. And I'm not sure exactly what that says in the context of a championship and multiple championship dogfights between two all-time greats. It's very different to, UI or that average rider to maybe try and comprehend. But at that point in time, when you're looking for the absolute edge, is a rider like Chad Reed, who's, just this far away. And even through the years when James started to enter into the conversation, I think people think that Chad really played sort of third fiddle to those two guys, and that's fine. But to bring it back, ultimately, he's in that conversation for a reason. So does the Suzuki tip him over the edge? I guess that's the question.
When you're at the top of the game, especially like those 2-3 were, a tiny margin is all it takes. So all you need is just that little tiny bit, because once again, those guys were in a league of their own and they were very close to each other at times. Like the 05 points race was a little bit blown out. Ricky did really put a stamp on that season, but you go to 2006 and it's like Ricky finishes with 338, James is on 336 and Chad's on 336. So when you talk about those things, and once again, it's full speculation, but increments is all it takes to go from being that third place guy on 336 to being in the lead with 339.
We're talking a lot about the bike, but there has to be a lot to be said about the actual Makita Suzuki team at that time. Their personnel, the direction they were going into, the investment, clearly, that they had made in order to acquire a guy like Ricky Carmichael at what at that time would have been considered the height of his powers. You know, he since went on to achieve, you know, greater things. But at that time, he was the man. But Suzuki didn't necessarily know that. What do you think the key factors would have been as to why you would have gone with RC over Chad at that point in time? Results speak for themselves. Ricky had plenty of those. But Chad was hot at that point in time.
Yeah, I guess you don't really know what the scenario was fully behind closed doors. I mean, there's obviously contracts in play, there's money in play, you know, relationships in play. Chad had been a Yamaha guy up until that point, so, you know, maybe he didn't want to leave. The Suzuki was unproven, so there's a lot of factors at play, but you can't do that. Like, you got to put yourself in that point in time in 2004, 2005. Like, it stems from 2003 because it's like, well, Chad won the last 7, and factories and companies would have been thinking and considering, is this the guy? Like, is this the guy? At that time, I don't think anyone could really say anything conclusively. You wouldn't know. You wouldn't be able to understand. And it sounds, in a way, disrespectful to Ricky, and in some sense it is, because he's the greatest of all time, and he went on to just murder everyone and all records. I mean, that has to be on the record. We understand that and we know that. Once again, you got to put yourself in that position to sort of see what people were thinking, whether they did think that Ricky had had his time. Like, Ricky had had his time at the top. It does come to an end, and maybe this Chad Reed kid was coming up and he would go on to win 4, 5, 6 championships on the trot. So yeah, I think there's a lot of factors at play, not necessarily just pertaining to Ricky and Chad themselves, but also the factories. I mean, Ricky knew Roger from Honda. Ricky brought Goose to Suzuki. It was a team largely built around Ricky. And then, you know, once again, you go up against those 3 together, and it's like, it sort of lights out at that point.
You know, we speculated on a few different things, but I want to push the speculation a little bit further. If he goes there, and Ricky, who's only known winning for quite some time, you know, like a perfect seasons, if Chad goes there and after running him right to the end on a Yamaha he was comfortable on, he goes to Suzuki, has that powerhouse team behind him. If he wins, say, even just 1 championship at that point, how do you think that impacts the years that followed?
When I think in my mind of which championships he left on the table, where it's not that he left them on the table because everybody won their championships. No ifs, ands, buts, or maybes about it. But you tweak 1 or 2 little things. Like 2005, Chad gets 16th at Anaheim 1 in the mud race. You give him a 3rd there, and all of a sudden he's right back in the championship hunt, and, you know, potentially pushes Ricky all the way to the wire in that championship race. 2006 is the same thing. He misses out by 2. 2009, when he did end up going to Suzuki, he misses out by 4, and then 11 with RV, he misses out by another 4. So it's like, yeah, he did potentially leave a few championships on the table. Once again, you can't necessarily say that, and I don't like saying that because the people who won the championships won the championships. But I think with a lot of people who are around in that era, they would say the same thing. Is how many times did we go to Vegas where it was like Chad's in the championship chase? He's right in the thick of it. And then unfortunately, you know, for him, the cookie crumbled the opposite way, and it went to Ricky, or it went to James, or it went to Ryan Villapoto. But he has the grounds to say that he feels he left a few championships on the table. I mean, 11, motocross, Catapult, flies off the track. There's another one. 2012, Arlington, he does his ACL after putting a lot of pressure on Ryan Villapoto in that race. So who knows? There's another one. But once again, like, speculation is a beautiful thing. As I keep reiterating, the people who won it, and that's what the history books say. But he definitely had some opportunities there.
If you paid any attention to any of the championships, really, that Chad was involved in, right up to the point where the RV, RD era, and, you know, pushing towards even the end of when they were around, on the right equipment, he was still sticking it to those guys. I mean, just a generational talent, and beyond a generational talent, because he went through multiple generations. But if Chad's on Suzuki, if that whole scenario plays out, if it goes that way, if you're going to have some fun with it, it could have been more than 2 championships indoors.
I don't disagree. Once again, it comes down to, if he goes there, where does Ricky find himself? Does he stay at Honda? Does he take, not a pay cut, but the same salary? And how the story goes, he was happy to stay at Honda. He wanted to stay at Honda. It's just that Honda wouldn't match the offer because what Honda were trying to do and it's smart, was utilize a bit of their budget to sign 259 on a 125. And so they wouldn't give Ricky the bag. And once again, I think that they fumbled the bag pretty badly because they didn't end up with anyone. But, if Ricky stays there and he gets onto that CRF 450 and he goes up against Chad on, Chad probably would have ridden the RM 252 stroke in 05.
I agree. I don't think he jumps up to that 450.
It's still a hard one. Chad could have been better on the Suzuki. The components that he wanted with the motorcycle, particularly when it comes to the frame. But when did Ricky lose? He did early in his career when he was a bit of a wild man, but as soon as he got his stuff sorted out, it didn't matter if the competition got better. It didn't matter if the riders got faster. It didn't matter if they were scrubbing harder. It just did not matter. Ricky Carmichael would go back to his home in Tallahassee, Florida. Jeannie Carmichael would say, look, your lap times need to reduce by 2 seconds. And that guy would reduce his lap times by 2 seconds. Like, hyperbole speaking, but like he would go to work. He would just match it and make sure that he was the man. So it's impossible to say otherwise. Once again, it would have been close. But I just come back to the fact is like, well, when did Ricky lose?
That's what a betting man would say. Chad to Suzuki, again, I mentioned earlier in the episode, I'm a Suzuki guy. Like the coming together of Chad and Suzuki just would have been an amazing moment for me personally at that point in my life.
You are a big Suzuki guy.
I am a big Suzuki guy. Yeah, I've got a soft spot for Suzuki. Yeah. Even still. I mean, I'm not going to kickstart a bike though, so it changes. But I mean, look.
Progressive.
To be fair, at that point in time, Suzuki was, it was a very different outlook for them at that point in time. And
that was a great motorcycle.
Oh, amazing motorcycle. And Ricky, he was the right guy for the job at the time. So 2 great things coming together. It's kind of ironic, I guess, that they spent so much money on him at that point in time. I mean, I can't imagine the bonuses that they were pouring out. He went on to do what he did on Suzuki. And I think there's a whole generation of people that would probably envisage Ricky on a Suzuki first and foremost. There's no doubt there's people that would think of Ricky on Cowie right back through to his amateur days. There's people who would think of that like dominant 24-0 Honda days. But, I mean, there is definitely a generation out there maybe listening to us that picture Ricky on that Suzuki, and he was... that was iconic for me. So cool.
He was great on the Suzuki. And what blows my mind with that is that dude literally retired on top. I mean, he was competitive in the 2007 season when he was just racing select rounds. He was still right there. Like if he wanted to line up and do all of those races, he would have been really competitive. I know James had a phenomenal season that year, but then you get to outdoors and it's like, I'm pretty sure, you'd have to fact check it, but he had the points lead when he retired. And he got to 100 overall wins. And he clearly had James's number. And then James crashes out at Washougal and does his ACL. And GL ends up winning that championship. It's like Ricky would have had that all day long. If he just had hung around, he would have had that all day long. And that's a GOAT thing. Like that's a GOAT move. That's a mic drop. That's what Ricky's all about. The best dude to ever do it in our sport is just to be like, I could have this, I'm beating you guys, but see you later.
It's interesting to think about other scenarios. I really do think out of almost all of them, Chad to Suzuki could have completely changed the landscape at that point in time. But that's our time up. I think it'd be interesting to see in the comments what people have to say. I'd like to see from people exactly how many championships they think that Chad packs on top of what he already achieved. I'm a Chad fan for life. I always have been. But I mean, if you're going to bet against the GOAT, like you best be prepared to lose money. So take to the comments, guys. How many championships would Chad have taken if he'd have made the move to Suzuki? What would the landscape have looked like? Do a little bench racing.
Yeah, more importantly in the comments below, don't be afraid to let us know how much we sucked, because this is the pilot episode. This is episode number 1 of Bench Racers. Hopefully you dig it. If you don't, let us know. It's cool, but yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.
Check out our other content, and we'll see you next time.